Treasurer Jim Chalmers says it's time to stop progressive red tape from strangling good ideas like housing reform and clean energy, now demanding regulators cut back on excessive rules that are slowing growth and innovation across the economy. And he's calling for a wake-up call for the left, launching a major push to revive Australia's productivity from the supply side. For more, we're joined by Professor Chris Berg from RMIT. Great to see you. Many business leaders say, well, what's been happening the last 3 years? Because red tape's only gotten worse.
You could say what's been happening for the last 20. I think red tape has been building up to such a shocking extent that Jim Chalmers is recognising that red tape has built up such that the government itself can't even build, can't even deliver the sort of major projects that it wants to. This is obviously most obvious in housing, but it's also true in infrastructure as well, and clean energy, as he's identified too, that all the red tape that is holding back the private sector is also increasingly holding back the public sector.
It sounds very similar to Elon Musk, doesn't it? He talks about clipboard warriors. We saw Doge rip through the United States, but it didn't make a huge amount of change. Is this something that sounds like it should happen? It makes sense in theory, but in practice, there are just too many vested interests holding clipboards.
Look, I am more optimistic perhaps than you are, but it is absolutely the case that on both the left and right now, we're recognising that the rules that we've loaded up on the economy, the rules that we've loaded up on economic activity and building infrastructure and building housing are actually starting to really materially hold back the economy. So this is part of as you mentioned, a international debate. So you're right, on the right, we've got people like Elon Musk arguing that we need to reduce red tape to unleash prosperity. But at the same time, there are particularly left-wing thinkers, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, to left-wing leaning journalists have written a book called Abundance that argues from the left perspective, or from the progressive perspective, that we need to reduce red tape so that we can build the sorts of socially beneficial infrastructure that progressives would like. And I think there's a frustration both in the United States and in Australia that these decades of regulatory reforms have only added to the slowdown in building rather than added materially to our prosperity.
I thought it was a really interesting message to the left as well from Jim Chalmers, where he said the left has this focus on rules and implementing rules. What were your views on that?
Yeah, look, it is super interesting. It's the rules that many left and right-wing governments have imposed that constrain all infrastructure and all building from both the public and private sector, but it's also the demands that we load on publicly funded projects. So it's not just that we insist that the government build a piece of infrastructure. There's also all sorts of additional requirements that we load on, that when we build it, that we use small businesses. Maybe we use small businesses from socially diverse communities. Maybe we have union rules. Maybe we have made in Australia rules. All of this loads up on the cost and slows down the delivery of projects such that progressive governments are no longer able to deliver the sorts of things that they believe that they are there to deliver, the sorts of infrastructure and national building projects that they believe will drive the economy forward. So I think it's a realization, as I say, across both sides of politics, that something over the last couple of decades has gone badly wrong.
It's really interesting. I mean, we've got pictures of the Prime Minister there, and when he was the Infrastructure Minister talking about aviation, he would talk about how the flight time from Sydney to Melbourne has only gotten longer over the past 30 years because of all of the things that happen at airports these days and the delays, and despite planes flying faster. So there is a frustration with productivity, and I suppose if you're talking about trying to make Australia a more productive place, which we know it's the opposite of, it's an interesting take. Instead of focusing on people, they're focusing on, as I mentioned, the clipboard warriors and all of the red tape in the background there. How do you think the crackdown on red tape could actually impact housing and renewables?
So productivity is really one of our most significant problems in Australia at the moment. We've got a long-term decline in productivity, and ultimately it is productivity that gives us economic growth, and it is economic growth that gives us prosperity. So the government has started to look at the things that hold back that productivity, and it's identified certainly in those areas like housing and the development of clean energy projects and so forth, that it's this red tape and over-regulation. But I think more generally, there is a productivity problem across the whole economy. And I'm glad that the Albanese government has started to talk about this productivity. They're going to hold a productivity summit or a productivity roundtable, I believe, in August, to try to consider about how we can get productivity moving again. And I'm really pleased that they've identified red tape and overregulation as one of the problems. But I worry that they're just not going to go far enough. They're not going to really understand that many of their other policies have actually imposed a lot of the regulation that has caused this problem in the first place.
I think about Sir Humphrey, of course, from Yes Minister, who would be finding this all very cute. Another minister who thinks he's going to change things will just wait for the next one to come along and it will go back. And it's interesting you talk about the right and the fact that both sides have become over-regulators. We think back to the famous statement, about tax from Kerry Packer, the late Kerry Packer, essentially saying, here's an idea, if you're going to make a rule, why don't you get rid of one at the same time? And that was 30 years ago, and here we are.
And the Trump administration actually did a pretty good job. The first Trump administration did a pretty good job at add one rule, you have to get rid of another two, or sometimes even rules as well. And the coalition in power in Australia has tried to cut red tape, but it tends to not go near as far as it needs to. And the stock of regulation and red tape continues to grow. You can just see really simple charts of the amount of rules in the economy. This is a hard problem to deal with, but I'm quite optimistic that maybe we're turning the tide and maybe there is a general recognition that this is a big problem.
It's nice that we're admitting that it is a problem. As I say, admitting it is the first start. Chris Berg, Professor Chris Berg, always appreciate your time on Ticker. Thank you.
Thank you so much.